Can we all just admit that whatever happens regarding the future of Sergio Perez, he's going to be going down swinging, and that choice of clip to really say to everybody that he's remaining put, that was a pretty bold decision. You can't deny that that choice of Jordan Belfort clip is a really good one in terms of showing how defiant you are, but now I actually think about it, we gotta look at the context of that soundbite. Upon looking back at that scene of the movie itself, the reason why the "I'm not flippin' leaving" thing comes about is that Belfort's financial wrongdoings have been rumbled and he's about to sign a plea bargain which bars him from his assets and job. He stands there in front of his team and you think he's going to be resigning, but then he doesn't. And then he says that famous line and then says, "They're gonna need a frickin' wrecking ball to take me out of here." As you could probably tell, I had to tone down the language there, otherwise the FIA would make me do community service. But when you look at the full context of that clip, it just makes me think that Red Bull right now is a complete and utter mess. Shout out to Wimbo Formula, by the way, for actually pointing that out and actually making me think about it. Also, when looking at this post, this isn't really addressing the rumours regarding his future next year. More addressing the rumours regarding the supposition that he might be announcing his retirement at this year's Mexico City Grand Prix. Now, whilst this would make a really poignant backdrop, if this were to be true, by the way, it is surely not, because remember, last year we had similar rumours, this time surrounding the ideas of a friend of a friend of a friend of Sergio Perez's management team saying that, oh, there are big plans for Sergio to announce his retirement from Formula One at his home race, and that is exactly why I wasn't really buying into these rumours about this year. So for Checo to address this and say, no, that's not true, I'm not leaving in terms of I'm not going to make the decision to step down, then fair enough, fair play to him. But I think it's becoming quite clear right now that the situation over at Red Bull is becoming a complete and utter joke. And it's become a really, really tired and wearisome thing to talk about. I know. You're probably bored and sick to your back teeth regarding what's happening with Sergio Perez. And exactly what do they want to use him for? What is his purpose there? Other than being maybe some sort of backup leader in case Max Verstappen walks. Why are we bamboozled about this driver's potential future? Now, I think it's very important to point out here that the results that we've seen from Checo over the past couple of seasons have been muddied somewhat in regards to the revelation/apology from Christian Horner concerning upgrades brought to last year's RB19 around the Spanish Grand Prix. That supposedly threw a spanner in the works when it came to Sergio Perez's understanding of the car, because at the beginning of last year, he was actually really good with it, as was Max Verstappen. Both drivers looked incredibly strong, almost as solid as what Piastri and Norris are able to do this year with this year's McLaren. Because let's remember, at the time before Miami, around about Baku, it looked really, really close. I think Checo was only within 6 points of Max Verstappen for the championship, and we could actually start to think after the first few races that, okay, we're about to head towards an intra-team rivalry at Red Bull for the championship. Okay, cool. I mean, it's a shame that the only sideshow that we've got is Fernando Alonso outperforming an Aston Martin, but still, okay, Checo's coming of age, and Max Verstappen's now got a potential rival. All right, let's get swinging. But then these upgrades came along, and according to the race, it threw Sergio Perez off completely. It had something to do with the car's overall balance and the way that the floor was managed, and this was all in response to what all of the other teams were doing. So with that potential overreaction, it compromised one of their drivers something fierce to the point where he had to go and get counselling. That's bad. Horner admits that since Max went on to win that race and kept on winning for several more races, Perez's hardship wasn't a priority. And then we got months and months of headlines from Helmut Marko questioning Checo's abilities, which then manifested into global condemnation of the driver, and then just completely him being ridiculed and him only being able to recover right near the end of it. So with this revelation in mind, you really need to take a step back and look at the entire situation regarding the turmoil of Sergio Perez at Red Bull. A lot of us were wrong to be quick to judge in regards to it being solely Checo's fault. It now has something to do with the team not taking his matters seriously, and with Toto Wolff feeling incredibly vindicated that he actually was right, and that printout, if it ever sees the light of day, might have actually had some kernel of truth to it. And who's to say that the issues were resolved on the RB19 and didn't carry over to the RB20? After all, it was described to be some kind of aggressive evolution of that dominant car. So when it comes to last season at least, Sergio is mostly pardoned, and his fight back near the end of that year did demonstrate determination to hold on to second in the championship from Hamilton, whilst Verstappen did all the heavy lifting for both titles, as encouraged by Horner. Now this next little bit is a little bit of a wild theory, and I'm going to have to bring out the foam of doubt here. For those of you who don't know, this is basically my equivalent of a tinfoil hat, because come on, who keeps tinfoil in a loft? Foam? You're more likely to find it up here. I wouldn't be surprised that in the midst of a potential dogfight between the two drivers, Christian Horner might have neutralised a possible scenario where his drivers would be fighting to the bitter end for the driver's title, and a possible further breakdown between them could compromise the team and their formidable car and allow Ferrari, Aston Martin and then McLaren to get the jump on them and make waste of a really good car, because the RB19, it looked leagues ahead of the field, so naturally Horner would want to make the most of it, as he had gone through a rough 2021 campaign. So now you could say at this point, Red Bull, in the back end of 2022, were heading towards smoother seas. It all looked really good. And we need to remember here that, sure, in 2021, the relationship between Verstappen and Perez looked pretty solid. They worked together. In fact, Perez was partly responsible for how Verstappen was able to be in the position he was at the end of Abu Dhabi 2021. But then in 2022, this is when things start to get a little bit awkward. As we all know, the situation regarding Monaco and Verstappen losing out on pole because Perez span out around Portier. And after that, there was something stuck in Max's craw, which ultimately meant that later on in the season, when it became paramount to help Sergio Perez in the championship to secure second place, Verstappen would not help. And then pointing out, not exactly verbatim, that they had a discussion about it and he was standing firm and he would not take any other answer as that answer. You could almost say that the relationship between them at that point was frosty, and if there was going to be a championship battle in the best car ever, it would only get worse if both of them were an equal pegging. And then you only have to hark back to how Mercedes operated 2016, and eternally Christian probably thought, nope. And so therefore we got where we are with Checo's concerns, and they were basically left on red. Now, please note, this is only a theory of mine. I am not saying this is truth. This is just speculation and conjecture on my part. This is just making me think, why on earth would they not take Sergio Perez's concerns seriously if they wanted to have a strong operation where both drivers were utterly dominant, and we might have seen a situation where Red Bull might have had 1,000 points in the Constructors' Championship? That would have been a feat that no one else would have been able to achieve, I think, ever. So that would have been another claim to fame that Christian Horner would have had, but ultimately we didn't get that because, hey, Max was doing okay on his own. Why do we need Checo? Okay, the World Tour in shreds. So whilst I appreciate the struggle that Sergio has been going through, and he was showing his form at the start of this season when Max was, the fall-off hit the Mexican harder than it did his teammate this year during the middle portion of it. Then, of course, as we know, and it's somewhat vindicated Perez's concerns, Verstappen then fell off to the point where he wasn't even getting on the podium and was lucky to even get in the top 5, whereas Sergio was relatively remaining put around 8th place or so. And therefore, you go into Baku, you then see, oh, would you look at that, all the upgrades and tweaks that Red Bull have been making, Sergio is the stronger driver. Okay, there might be something here. But then it gets all the more complicated in Singapore, where Max Verstappen is able to put that car in second place and be able to limit the gains that Lando Norris would be able to have with his dominant display. And then you look at Sergio, not able to get out of Q2, and then he's not even able to get past Franco Colapinto or Nico Hülkenberg. He has to rely on undercuts to get partially the job done. So it really makes things all the more complicated. What exactly is going on here with this car? Who are they favouring? Are they trying to mount a fight back with the constructors, so that means both drivers have a car they can work with? Or are they just thinking, oh, to hang with Sergio Perez, we'll just think about next year, let's get Max that World Championship again? Because we don't know where we are. Marco says the constructors is lost, Horner thinks it's all to play for. What is it? So this brings us back to where we are right now, with Checo fervently hunkering down and proclaiming that he is not going anywhere and that he will not be announcing his departure from F1 at his home race or anytime soon. And let's not forget, he still has some races coming up where he has historically been pretty good. He's been able to get loads of 3rd places, 4th places, and quite frankly, I think Red Bull will take anything in the top 5 at this point. We do have to remember here that Baku and Singapore were meant to be tracks where he has historically been good at as well, and ultimately out of both of those races he's come away with 1 point. Although let's be fair, in Baku, it wasn't his fault. Carlos Sainz and he had a tangle, so in terms of on track he was doing really well there, but points count for everything at the end of the day. And I do wish Sergio well. I want him to be able to bounce back and maybe see if there's any way of clawing back the deficit against George Russell and get past the British driver from Mercedes. Because at this point, Ferrari are looking really close to Red Bull. They're closer to Red Bull than Red Bull is to McLaren at the moment, because I think Charles Leclerc has gotten his groove back. And we do have to remember about a fellow Red Bull driver who was at McLaren at the time, who made a defiant post on social media saying that he was staying put. And then we also have to remind ourselves exactly exactly where that led. Because as we remember, Daniel's response to rumours regarding McLaren dropping him were more conventional, but no less passionate. In that, Daniel voiced that he wasn't going anywhere, and that he was committed to the team for the rest of the year, and that he wanted it more than ever. So, yes, he was determined to stay put. But the team weren't so compelled, and not long after that, we got the announcement that he was being dropped and then paid off for his remaining tenure, and then we saw Oscar Piastri coming in, and then we are where we are today. So yeah, it's all very well and good a driver saying that he's staying put and that he's committed and that he will do better. If the team isn't backing you, you don't necessarily have the control as to what happens with your destiny, unless you are able to get the results on the track, which unfortunately, due to the fact that the Red Bull right now is all over the place before its fabled Austin upgrade, Sergio doesn't really have much control over it. It seems to be all over the place. So yes, whilst it's extremely important, and I welcome the fact that Sergio this year is far more confident and stronger and aggressive in regards to all of the criticism that he's receiving, he's pushing back hard, and I really welcome this. I respect this tremendously. He is going to be hanging out there right until the bitter end, saying that he's remaining, he's staying put, and this is exactly what his fans want to see from him. So when I saw this social media post, I was like, well done, Sergio. This is exactly the classy way to do it. But we also need to look at the broader context of the entire situation as well, because who's to say that if he survives into 2025, that these rumours regarding a Mexico City announcement won't come up again in some other shape or form? This will keep on hounding him unless he brings in the results, and he's much closer to Verstappen, or maybe in some cases, doing better than him. Checo is keen to hold on to his seat, but is Red Bull just as keen to hold on to him in the long run? And I don't think you need me to tell you, but the way Red Bull and B-Carb have been handling their drivers this year has been absolutely abysmal. The way we got no proper goodbye or tribute to Daniel Ricciardo's supposed last race was a travesty. Yes, you could argue that he already had his farewell in 2022, which was overshadowed by Sebastian Vettel's retirement, but the amount the Australian had contributed to the sport itself and the profile of Red Bull at the beginning of F1's resurgence into cultural relevancy needed to be treated with more respect. But look, that's not the topic of today's video. It was the topic of this video here. So even though Sergio Perez was able to survive the storm that was brewing after the Belgian Grand Prix, when it looked really clear that his supposed contractual conditions about Red Bull being able to release him without penalty had been realised, it looked really odds on that Daniel Ricciardo would be getting the step up to partner Max Verstappen for the remaining part of the season. Heck, it looked like Daniel and Max were convinced. They flew off in a helicopter together, thinking they were going to be teammates once more. Then a few days later, we got the announcement that that was not the case. And with Liam Lawson being brought in for the last 6 races to be compared to a more experienced Tsunoda, Checo's probably going to be sweating even more buckets than if Daniel was still there. Because with Ricciardo, you could argue that Daniel's age was a factor when compared to the former. Yes, he's only a few months older than Perez, but it was still a point of reference. Now though, his competition, they're both in their early to mid-20s. They potentially could be the future of Red Bull if Max Verstappen moves to another team or completely leaves F1 together, because Helmut Marko has kept saying that we need to take all the stuff that Max has been saying regarding leaving the sport seriously, because he and him are in complete contact with each other all of the time. So this is the sort of thing that will not go away and should be actually taken into account regarding discussions of Max's future. And I reckon that both drivers, Tsunoda and Lawson, will be really pushing hard to get that second seat in front of Perez. They are chomping at the bit for that opportunity. And we do have to admit that Tsunoda has been trying harder than most Red Bull recruits to be getting that plum, but he seemingly is ignored. And then Lawson has the backing of Helmut Marko, which in recent times and recent days, I've started to figure out and realise that, hey, maybe Marko is winning the power play and the power struggle, at least when it comes to who gets to pick what drivers, because Lawson, he is the charge of Helmut Marko. And if Lawson does get this plum for this and next year, then Isaac Hadjar most likely will become the reserve driver of V-Carb and Red Bull Racing. And he, by the way, is another favourite of Helmut Marko. So with Ricciardo seemingly removed from the equation, Perez is heavily reliant on the goodwill of Christian Horner to keep him where he is, because right now, it seems all the loyalty that Perez showed regarding Christian Horner's troubles at the beginning of the year and the allegations surrounding him are now coming home to roost. Christian gave him that contract extension thinking that that would bolster Checo's morale and help improve his lot regarding this year, that he had a confident future, he didn't have to worry about his tenure. But that seemingly didn't work. And now we must be thinking, well, what if a rogue upgrade around the time of Imola just threw off Perez's groove in this car and therefore it made it worse for him like it did in 2023? Because as we saw, Red Bull doesn't necessarily take Checo's feedback seriously because Max is doing better in it, so Well, what's the problem then? They must be thinking. And as we've seen, Checo can get good results with Red Bull cars. It's just sometimes the direction of development goes off in a direction that favours the Dutchman, whose driving style is not that similar to Checo's. And if not handled properly, the operation could lose future starlets as well as their brightest one, and their future could wind up a lot cloudier than hoped. Also, I feel like Christian Horner's acquisition of Checo for the 2021 season did make the team more dependent than ever on sponsors that the driver brought to the table. Now, before you're thinking that they're only keeping Checo around because he's a paid driver, we need to take a look at the bigger picture surrounding the top echelons of Formula One and motorsports in general. These days, you kind of have no choice but to be paid drivers, because let's be real here. In Formula 2, you need to have at least maybe $3 or $4 million behind you to be able to fund a full season, which unfortunately Zach O'Sullivan with the Williams Driver Academy did not have. And we are going to be seeing more and more of this, that these drivers try and get into Formula 2, but they have to then pull out mid-season because they've run out of money. You have to be getting into Formula 1 with a couple of sponsors behind you. So as far as I think, that kind of point is moot, but it is there. But it's just disheartening. We need more people in motorsport that can get into it purely on skill alone. And also, Red Bull always relied on its own crop of drivers for talent, which it itself funded. Except for Verstappen, who was brought into the junior team weeks before he made his Toro Rosso debut in 2014. So you could argue that its greatest driver was an outsider to its roots. And now, with another outsider of its base program in that seat, with tens of millions of dollars as outsider money, and access to a whole region's market share of their drink, it's made decisions regarding their lineup all the more harder. And then you've also got to take into consideration the situation regarding Daniel Ricciardo, one person who definitely came through the Red Bull junior ranks. And now he has such appeal that the announcement of his departure resonated with sports and leagues that had nothing to do with Formula One. When you get people like the NBA and the NFL cheering Daniel on for his next chapter in life, you know that he's resonated amongst the wider world outside of Formula One. So he has a really big impact, almost as much as Lewis Hamilton in America. And who's to say how much responsibility and influence that Daniel Ricciardo had in acquiring Visa and Cash App to partner up with the second Red Bull team, and also have some stickers and sponsors on the main Red Bull racing car? Do you think that they're happy that one of the most popular drivers in Formula One has been axed in such an auspicious way? I don't think so. So I wouldn't be surprised if Visa and Cash App depart the Red Bull organization next year. I would not be surprised if Visa Cash App RB becomes another sponsor entirely, RB. So it does give you food for thought regarding how Red Bull runs things. Have they become subservient to their own sponsors? Because let's not forget, Oracle do bring a lot of money to the table. And if they don't perform, who's to say that Oracle might just say, you know what, you're not doing good enough, we're going to leave. Bye. Yeah, got to consider that. So as you can probably tell, the whole thing surrounding Sergio Perez has become a complete and utter minefield. We're now in a situation where we can't take anything people say seriously. While Sergio himself is confident that he's staying and that there are no plans seemingly to announce his exit from F1 in Mexico City, and that the boss of Red Bull Racing is still backing him, the question mark still is there. It will not go away. So the attention will now be focused on the two V-carb drivers, Tsunoda and Lawson, and how they fare. If Tsunoda completely blows Lawson out of the park, then it might give Perez some breathing space because, let's be real here, Tsunoda is locked into V-carb for next year. Horner will not allow Tsunoda anywhere near Verstappen, no matter how good he is. And then Lawson will be out of a job because he'll have had his time to prove himself, and therefore Red Bull won't have to worry about the whole thing about, oh, if you don't use Lawson for 2025, you can go elsewhere, because then they'll have gone, well, we tried him out, and he wasn't good enough. And then you might get Hadjar in there for 2025 alongside Tsunoda, and then see how he fares. And then it will sort of get the junior team going again, but not in an ideal way in terms of the ultimate dream of getting up to the top one. And then the absolute farcical rumour that Helmut Marko is now looking at Franco Colapinto to be able to come in at V-carb against Yuki Tsunoda. Helmut, stop looking at Williams and then going full magpie mode. What is it with you and Williams? You pick Nick de Vries, a Mercedes driver, to partner Tsunoda. That didn't work out. You then look at Williams again with Colapinto and think, oh, that could be the guy. He's got some presence in South America. As he mistakenly said that Perez was from there as well. What's going on here with Helmut? No! Just stick with your own drivers. You've got Lawson, you've got Hadjar, you've got people coming up. Just stick with them. So whilst it's important for Sergio to step up to the plate and give it its all throughout all of this, it's equally important that his team provides him a car in which he can perform to the best of his ability and be just as potent as his words on social media. And considering that that wasn't the case last year, and that we might fall into a similar pattern where the team prioritizes Verstappen above everything else because they want to keep him sweet and keep him there for as long as they possibly can through 2028, then I think that Sergio Perez is going to have an uphill struggle to be able to justify his position. Red Bull might not care. They might just want to take the money and just rely on Max Verstappen all the time. And that is a dangerous game, because if Max goes and they have to rely on Perez as the team leader, sure, Perez comes out of this singing and he's been able to survive Max Verstappen and say, I was the one that stood up against Max Verstappen and won. But then they're left without their biggest and most reliable driver, and they're going to lose a lot of support, and yeah, they won't have Daniel Ricciardo back anymore. Unless they have to crawl back and then get him back in the car, they'll have to have a major walk back. So right now, Red Bull are in complete and utter disarray. They're going to have to be careful, much like how I reckon McLaren will need to be careful next year if they want to avoid a similar messy affair regarding both of their drivers' future and where they stand in the team, which is something I talk more about in this video here that you can go and watch right now. Oh, and by the way, I'm going on vacation until October the 11th, so this will be my last video for a while. So if you enjoyed the content, leave a like, subscribe, let's get ourselves closer to 100k, maybe by the time I get back. Joking. But anyway, thank you for all your support, and I shall see you around on the flip side. See ya!